All right. Thank you for joining us today in celebration of the Estuary Program's National Estuary Week. We're very excited to have Ann Birch from the Nature Conservancy and the team give us an update on the East Bay Oyster Habitat Restoration Project. Before I hand it over to Ann, if you're not a presenter, we do ask that you go ahead and mute yourselves, and we'll save questions till the end. And without further ado, we're all very excited. Thanks, Ann.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to take myself off video for a minute while I'm speaking, if I can figure out how to do that. I thought I had it.
Good
so I'm
luck.
just going to.
No, there you are.
Oh, I'm going to stop my video for a minute. There we go. Okay, and let me share my screen again. So I really welcome, and it's really great to be with you today and see how many people are really interested in this topic, which isn't a surprise to us because we're talking oysters. I want to thank the Estuary Program for hosting this event and for inviting us to present on this really exciting project. We have an incredible team working.
You don't want to learn about oysters.
We have an incredible team working on it. So here's a rundown of what you'll hear about. I'll kick it off with background information on why we care about oysters and the history of the project. Next, Jeff DeQuattro will present on the project timeline and design criteria. He'll turn it over to Matt Davenport with Jacobs, who will go deeper on the project design. And then Drew Sprinkle with Crowder Golf will walk you through the construction with video footage taken by Jacobs and by Daryl Boudreau with the Northwest Florida Water Management District. Drew will hand it over to Nigel Temple with WSP, and he'll describe the extensive monitoring they're conducting. And I'll wrap it up with a brief overview of complementary projects we have underway, and then open it up for questions and comments. So let's get started. So before we talk about the specifics of the project, I wanted to dive into a little history and why we should care about oysters. The 2011 Shellfish Reefs at Risk report by the Nature Conservancy and scientists all over the world presented data that revealed an 85% global decline of shellfish reefs. A result of this extensive research on oysters meant that they were identified as one of the most imperiled marine habitats in the world. The decline seen globally is mirrored in the Pensacola Bay system in Escambia and Santa Rosa counties and elsewhere. The map on the left shows that in the late 1800s, there were oysters throughout these bays. Since then, the oyster fishery and the habitat has all but disappeared due to a variety of stresses that are noted in the arrows along the bottom. We've made a lot of great strides in restoration since that report, but we still have a long way to go. The Pensacola community is really committed to restoring oyster habitat in the fishery. And oysters are a really resilient species. Given the right conditions, they can recover with projects like the one we're talking about today. Oysters are unique in the marine world because they're a species that form a habitat, oyster reefs, and they're also a fishery. So think oysters on the half shell. And that's a fun fact, but so what? Well, oysters and the habitat they create provide a lot of services that both people and nature rely on, such as filtering water and nutrients, protecting shorelines from erosion, and as a fishery. So oysters are also food, and the reefs they form are nursery and shelter habitat for commercially valuable shrimp, crabs, fish, and other animals. The Nature Conservancy is a leader in oyster habitat restoration in the United States and throughout the world. We always work in partnership with others, and the Pensacola East Bay Oyster Habitat Restoration Project has benefited from the collective experience by TNC and partners. The project is located along approximately 6.5 miles of shoreline in East and Blackwater Bays in Santa Rosa County. And the primary objective is to restore a thriving oyster habitat through construction of 33 individual reefs. A project of this scale would not be possible and successful without the partnerships of these entities that you see on the screen and the support of many throughout the community. NFWF, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, has provided the funding for the entire project from design through construction and monitoring. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission assisted with the funding proposal, and they offer their expertise throughout the design and construction process. The Nature Conservancy, we propose the project and we oversee project management. The contractors we hired are experts in their field, and we're really proud to be working with them. WSP conducts the monitoring. Jacobs is responsible for project design, permitting, and engineering, and Crowder Gulf for construction. So I'll hand it off to Jeff now to talk about the project timeline and design criteria.
Thanks, Anne. Appreciate that. Again, I'm Jeff DeQuattro. I work for TNC's Gulf of Mexico program. I'm the project construction lead on this project. So the project obviously takes a village, as you saw from that last slide, and it also takes a long time to work these out. And we're very grateful for the funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to phase this project, or to fund this project through 2 phases. We are finished with phase 1, and that's where we started in 2016 with the data gathering, the project design, the stakeholder engagement, and all of that led up to our ability to get a permit to install 6.5 miles of oyster reef along the shoreline. We're now in phase 2. We started construction this summer. A huge milestone for us. It's very cool to see some of the footage, which we're going to share with you in a minute. But it took a long time to get here. Next slide, Anne. You know, the reason it took so long is because we had certain design criteria that we wanted to meet. We had goals for the project. We have goals for the project. The main one being creating oyster reef habitat in this intertidal area. It's very important. It's very biodiverse. And one of our goals was to avoid any commercial harvesting areas. So there's no commercial harvest areas here. And we also want to avoid impacting Escribano Point, which is that point at the very top, yes, where the cursor is. That's a very important recreational site that we'd like to preserve for that purpose. And so we had to think about what are the design shapes, what are the materials we want to use. You can go to the next slide, Anne. Everything from in the materials, from the capital cost of the materials or the construction, all the way down to the oyster settlement suitability. So we looked at all these different things to figure out which material is going to be best at this location in order to achieve our goals, which was to create that viable oyster reef habitat. And so we did decide on limestone and in different sizes of limestone, which I think you might hear about soon. Next slide, Anne. But there were other options like fossilized oyster shell, different matrix of limestone, different types of limestone. And so we looked at all of this different type of aggregate material, loose material, which really would allow us to form and shape the reefs that we want to create a very dynamic habitat, not only for oysters, but for fish and crabs and shrimp and all the other species that use these structures. Next slide, please. And we did that with the help of a lot of people, right? A lot of entities, pretty much any entity that has any sort of oversight of the resource or species or area was involved in this project. And so that was one of my favorite parts about this project, is getting to work with all of these people that you see here. A lot of them are actually on the phone now still. This was taken, I think, in 2016 or something. And so that's been a great process. And every step along the way, you know, we have input from experts and stakeholders and people from the area and people that know coastal engineering and oyster settlement. And so this stakeholder engagement group, stakeholder working group included, and these are all of our acronyms that we like to use all the time, right? So U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Fish and Wildlife Commission, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Quality, I'm sorry, FDACS, Department of Agriculture, Eglin Air Force Base. And so all of these entities were involved and more were involved in the formation of this plan, this idea. And so Matt Davenport with Jacobs is now going to present to you the actual design of the project, which is really cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. And it looks like it's already going. So, you know, when we had this awesome technical working group and everyone had their inputs and had their thoughts, and then how do we take all these design criteria and then come create something that's defensible and gives us a good sense of that we're doing the right thing, right? And then obviously a part of that is data collection, and then taking that data and then inputting it into obviously with today's day and age of computers and simulations, we can utilize some of these modeling softwares to help us understand the behavior of these reefs from a how it's going to impact the shoreline, as well as the influences across the board as far as is this the best place to place oysters, right? So what this video is showing is this is an output from one of the models demonstrating the ebb and flow of velocities of flow across the reefs. You know, this is during preliminary stages of design, is understanding, okay, how far away from the coast should these be? You know, taking into consideration how we know oysters like to build their reefs, you know, organically or naturally, right? Depending upon the type of conditions that it sees. We utilize all that information to understand, okay, where are we going to locate them, and how are we going to, what geometry are we going to give them? And so, Anne, if you'll go to the next slide. You know, so we looked at, okay, how far away from the coast should we have these? And then the other piece, of course, is if we look at this place in entirety, is this whole system, understanding the importance of I guess you could say the neighbors, right? And one of those neighbors being Escribano Point. This is a very, very important, you know, location in the East Bay. You know, we have lots of boaters that enjoy going out there. It's an important element to the environment out there. And knowing that, hey, you know, our primary goal here is to create an oyster habitat. Ideally, we could do that on top of having a protective barrier to the coastline, being able to help do these other things. But as we move forward with these design criteria and understanding the system as a whole, you know, you start to understand that you need to make choices. And one of those choices was, we want to ensure that Escribano Point is kept, is provided the sand that is needed to get to sustain it, right? And so as part of that, we strategically placed all the reefs a little further away from the coast such that they don't inhibit or don't block the passing of sand to the Escribano Point. Next slide. And so obviously there's all these balances that we have to take into consideration, right? So yes, we want to have a shoreline for protection. Yes, we want to do these things, but no, we don't want to negatively impact Escribano Point, or, you know, it's a dead zone for flow, and the oysters would probably have a hard time being sustainable there because they're not getting the flushing necessary for them to survive. So we take all that into consideration. And obviously when you have a big, broad team with all different perspectives, that only strengthens your ability to make these decisions. So taking the technical working groups considerations, incorporating with engineering, constructability, working with Crowder Golf, you know, we were able to come up with the design. So if you go to the next slide, this is a snapshot of geography, you know, location of the 33 reefs across the area. And so we have about 8 reefs in the what we call the Blackwater Bay area. Along there's the Fundy Bayou. And then across the bottom, you know, we have varying geometries across there. And we're going to go there in a minute. But 2 things I wanted to point out is it's still very shallow where these are going to be placed. And two, obviously you can see that we've avoided Escribano Point and avoided other locations, whether there's a pier from locals that live there, or of course, any type of creek or bayou that discharges. You obviously don't want to, limit their ability to flush out of there. So go on to the next slide. Wanted to show a few geometries that we developed, right? And this is coming from, once again, those working groups, understanding with Oyster experts, as well as doing some journal research and understanding the different types of reef formations that happen organically. We determined that, hey, we should have a reef that has somewhat of a string reef characteristics. Given the conditions we're seeing in this site, there's going to be a cross flow. And what we've noticed through the research and understanding is that a lot of oysters will naturally develop these string reef formations that are perpendicular to the flow of water. So if you go on to the next slide, this is a little more deeper look in this. So there's like quote unquote two parts here that we like to call the protective part in the blue, which will be bayward facing, right? And this is the rocks, the limestone rock that we utilize here is going to be a little bigger there. And then behind it is the string reef aspect, right, of the segment of the oyster reef. And this is where, there's a little bit more smaller rocks with a little bit more, I guess, angularity and some voids, right, to kind of provide that habitat, not only for oysters, but for secondary benefits, right, crabs, fish, etc. And so we try to use both of these together to provide and maximize the amount of habitat available for oysters and then other creatures, of course. So obviously, like I said, it's a string reef. Yeah, go ahead and hit a video. That's fine. Go on to the next one, Ian. You're doing good. We have the string part behind it and the protective piece. And so this is kind of demonstrating the different tides that will be experienced there. We took into consideration sea level rise and of course, storm surge and understood what the what is the I guess design criteria from a storm event. How much damage do we anticipate occurring for those types of storms? So as you can see through here, that the tides during the summer, these rocks will mostly be hidden, right, because of the higher tides. And then of course, during the winter, a little bit more of it will be exposed during those winter months when you have a lot of north shore winds pushing water away from the shore. Next slide, please. So this is another rendering, right? So this is showing where they're going to be. It gives a good representation from Escribano Point. We try to avoid the point, but there's going to be those four, biomimicry or inspired designs across the entire area. And so if we go to the next slide, this is what it rendered, what it will look like. Here is a design drawing that I've kind of rotated to be in the same realm as this picture to kind of demonstrate what we're doing here, right? So of course, Crowder Gulf is actively in the middle of construction out there, and on the bottom you can see they're staking out, getting ready and prepared to drop rock on the third reef there. All the while they've got the two reefs already in construction, and this picture really made me smile, being the design manager, to see, okay, this is what it looks like, and you can see the different angles that we're attacking the various reefs. So it's not just one long line of rock, and you can really see that dynamic design being implemented by Crowder Gulf. So I was really excited to see this picture come together. Next slide. And lastly, and I think I'll hand it over to Crowder to talk more details after one or two more slides, but here's another picture of that, showing the three reefs under construction. I think this was done right before Ida, and we're going back out there shortly to continue construction. I'll let Crowder Gulf discuss that. Next slide. So I wanted to throw this one out there to kind of show the process, right? So remember, design on the left there with our string and protective barriers. And then there's three different types of stone and rock that Crowder Gulf, of course, can talk about here, Drew will, but just wanted to show the aspects of the construction, right? So you've got this base layer, the 57 stone, which is really, you put at the bottom to kind of help buffer all the bigger rocks, if you will. So it enables us to ensure there's not as much sinking of rocks into the sand. It's a very sandy material, so we don't anticipate too much sinking. But this does allow the weight and the load to distribute more uniformly across the bottom. Thus, be more cost effective in the sense that you don't need more rocks as things sink. So it's a good practice to have some type of base layer on there. And then there's two different types of rock. There's the bigger limestone rock, riprap, and the smaller one being used for the protective barrier part of the reef, as well as the string part of the reef. Next slide. I think at this point, I will go one last one and hand it over to Drew, but I always like this one showing the design on top of the actual reefs being placed there. So Drew, I'll let you take it away.
Here.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, my name is Drew Sprinkle. I'm the construction manager for Crowder Gulf on this project. I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off as well here, so that way I can look at my notes. But that picture that you're seeing right there is our layout survey stakes. That is the first step we have to do before we put any rock in the water. What that is, our survey crews use GPS survey equipment to locate specific points that I'm sure you saw on the plans that Matt showed earlier. We have to have those points surveyed exactly, so that way we get this right, you know, the first time, so that way we're not out there taking up rock. That definitely makes it a lot easier. The yellow boom that you see floating on top of the water right there, that's turbidity boom. That's going to be used to make sure there's no sediment floating in the water that gets away from the construction zone that would harm any wildlife. We put that around anytime that we're working in the water like this. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Ann. All right, so this is a good aerial shot of Reef 12 and 13 being constructed. You can see that we use multiple barges for this. We use transport barges to bring rock down the Mississippi River. All the rock that we're using for this job is coming from Arkansas, and it's barged down the Mississippi on transport barges. And each one of those carries generally between 1,200 and 14 tons of rock. There's going to be a total of 60,000 tons of rock used on this project. So some things, obviously, that Matt brought up earlier. You know, this is being done in relatively shallow water. We're talking about, you know, between 2 and 4 feet. So that's definitely one thing we have to be cognizant of in our scheduling here. And you can see that, you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Ann. So this is a great video that Jacobs did. That's our material handler placing rock in reef number 12 with a clamshell grapple. You can definitely see that a skilled operator is very necessary for this kind of work. You're sitting on one barge with a 100,000-pound machine, and you're reaching over onto the transport barge to put rock into the water. Obviously, you can see that it's pretty weather dependent work. If it was to get rough out there, if those waves were to get up to 2 to 3 feet, which they do, that would, you know, make it unsafe. So our weather days are very, very important. We have to work when the weather's good. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, in. So this is an aerial shot. What I was talking about earlier, we have to use multiple barges. That if we were to put the rock and that material handler on the same barge, it would be too heavy to draft in that shallow water. So what we do is we bring the excavator up there close to where we're going to be working and put the rock next to it on a separate barge. That allows for them to get in there in shallower water. That also allows for us to, if we use all the rock on one barge, we can leave the material handler there on site and put another barge in with rock on it. So that way we don't have to keep moving barges around, disturbing the bottom. It really makes for a good approach. Another thing we have to do here, he's working right there in this video on placing the breakwater segment, which is the larger limestone riprap that we talked about. We have to make sure that we start from the inward side first. So that way we put the rock there first and then we work out. So that way we don't work ourselves out of space. And at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Nigel Temple with WSP to present on the pre and post construction monitoring aspect of the project.
Hey guys, Nigel Temple here. with WSP. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off also here. So thanks, guys. We've heard a lot about project and design and some details about the construction. But for my part, let's step back and talk again about those overall goals. So obviously, we hope that we'll get oysters to recruit to the new reefs, which will then improve the water quality. But also, thanks, guys. We've heard a lot about project and design. What? Got some feedback there. So. Anyways, we also hope that we have an increase in the abundance of crabs and other invertebrates, some fishes, and also water birds that we hope will utilize these new habitats. We also hope that the reefs increase, or at the very least, do no harm to the coverage of seagrasses in the areas shoreward of the reefs, since the structures will hopefully knock down the intensity of some of those waves. So the question is, how do you know if the project is meeting these goals? And that's where monitoring comes in. And it's really how we evaluate both the project progress, but it also gives us the tools we need to adaptively manage the project if necessary. Next slide now. So the monitoring design is pretty simple. Our team goes out and collects a suite of data about the oysters, water quality, fishes, water birds, waves, and seagrasses from locations where the reefs will be constructed, which is outlined in blue here, and also in a control area where no reefs will be constructed, which is outlined in yellow here. So next slide. We then use these data to make comparisons from before and after the reefs are constructed, and between the control areas and those areas impacted with the reef. So this kind of classic Backy design both allows us to evaluate the effects of the reefs on the oyster recruitment and also on those suite of natural benefits that we talked about. So now we know, basic monitoring design. We'll now dig a little deeper into the actual ways that we collect these data with maybe a few extra just kind of interesting facts. So oyster recruitment and growth, obviously one of the primary objectives here. To evaluate those, we use a couple of methods, quadrats, which are pictured on the bottom right here, and substrate baskets, pictured on the top right. So in both methods, we'll count all the live and dead oysters, and then measure the length of all the live oysters in the way that's kind of pictured here in that picture on the left there. While we're at it, as we see other critters like inverts or what have you in the quadrats or substrate baskets, we'll also note those as well. So far, we haven't seen any oysters in our quadrats. Maybe that's to be expected with no substrate for them to sit on. And the substrate baskets won't get installed until after the reefs are constructed. However, we do see some oysters nearby attached to stuff like tree stumps, which is kind of pictured here in the bottom left-hand corner. So we feel pretty optimistic that we'll see some oyster recruitment on these reefs. The next slide. So as you remember, we expect water quality to improve as the oysters grow. That's illustrated pretty clearly, so to speak, in this picture on the right-hand side here, where you can see immediately the effect that oysters have, on the water quality in the tanks. So to measure water quality in the field, we actually use a combination of two methods. So the first is using this YSI probe that you see in the top left-hand corner here, which allows us to quickly measure the temperature, salinity, and dissolved oxygen, which are all variables that have a big effect on oysters. And in the case of dissolved oxygen, are directly related to water quality. The second picture on the bottom left here is more analog. This thing is called a secudis. And so the different color triangles there allow you to see this thing as you're lowering it to deeper depths. So the idea being that the deeper you see it, the lower the turbidity in the water, and also the greater the water quality. So as an example, the water on the left-hand side is more turbid than the right-hand tank. in that picture on the right here. So next slide. As you might expect, we use crab traps to measure the abundance of blue crabs, which are baited with mullet that we get the night before from Joe Patty's in downtown Pensacola. Using that setup, we typically get, plenty of crabs, which are, an example of what you see in the top left-hand picture here. As a side note, if you look closely at the picture, you'll notice that the crab has red pinchers. This is one way to kind of tell the difference between males and females, since the female crabs have painted pinchers or painted nails, where the male crabs have blue claws. So in addition to our crabs, we typically get other critters, including this hardhead catfish pictured on the left here, which really makes crab trap sampling, pretty exciting and also a bit treacherous, really. You never know what you're going to get. And most of the time it's something that'll pinch or poke you. So we take, extra precautions like using gloves and using tongs like you see here whenever we're doing that kind of sampling. So juvenile fishes and transient crustaceans, we use seine nets like the ones you see pictured in the center and top right here. And really we've seen a pretty good diversity of species in our net so far. The photos on the right hand kind of show the most frequently caught fishes that we see, including the flagpin mahara, the brown shrimp on the bottom left-hand photos, and then this one on the top, that's our inland silver side. That one is by far the most frequently caught fish that we've seen out there. Outnumbers both in terms of total count and biomass every other fish species that we see out there. So pretty common fish in this area. So in addition to those common, we also from time to time catch some other cool fish in there, including this pinfish and a plainhead filefish that you see in the middle top here, and also the black cheek tonguefish you see in the bottom right there. Next slide. So for water birds, we use 15-minute visual surveys with some binoculars to count the number of species and identify those species. The most frequently observed birds are really the kind of who's who of cool and iconic kind of water birds, which includes the bald eagles you see pictured in the middle here, and the osprey on the right. You'll often also see cormorants kind of perched on random structures or diving for fish. Pictured on the bottom right here, that's Escribano Point. It's a really popular bird hangout. We typically see a bunch of different birds really hanging out here in really large numbers. So you can see these brown pelicans and laughing gulls kind of getting spooked as we're driving the boat by Escribano Point, but really a good place to go see birds if you're out in the area. Next slide. So we measured waves in two ways. Previously, it's been done manually using a measuring stick, but recently we've moved to a low-cost wave gauge that we can place directly in the water for longer periods. So so far, using both methods, we've seen that the wave climate in the area is generally pretty mild, with waves typically under a foot. Though we do see that waves in the area south of Escribano Point, it's a little more, I guess you could call it extreme than the area in the north area of Escribano Point. You might expect that given an exposure to the predominant south winds. And then finally, moving to seagrasses, we measure seagrass coverage using two methods as well, including the quadrats that you saw previously in the Oyster metrics. But we also use drones also to measure seagrass coverage. So far, no seagrasses have been identified using the quadrats, though we have seen sparse patches of widgeon grass in both the southern and northern areas around Escribano Point. Maybe pointing out why the drone coverage is, using two different methods kind of gives you the best bang for your buck. We see most of the seagrasses are identified using those drone surveys. So the bulk of the seagrasses that we found are north of Escribano Point. And that's kind of highlighted in the inset photo on the left there. For example, our most recent assessment showed a total density of around 25,000 square meters in this area as compared to, just over 2,000 square meters in the area south of Escribano Point. Just like our quadrats, the most commonly observed species include the widgeon grass, but we've also seen, kind of randomly dispersed patches of turtle grass as well. But also, unfortunately, we've also seen the invasive Eurasian water milfoil, which is pictured here on the right, but it's really only in small and isolated patches. So, to kind of sum things up, to date, and except for the seagrasses identified using drones, we've really seen no significant differences in any of the measured parameters, between the areas where the reefs will be constructed and in the control areas. So obviously this makes for a great set of baseline conditions, that we can use to evaluate the progress of the project and if we need to make any changes along the way. So the next steps are obviously to continue to monitor these parameters and look to see, if they, not only oysters, but other critters utilize these new habitats. And we have reason to be optimistic too. So if you can see in this left-hand picture here, circled in yellow, you see this little blue crab checking out the new reefs here. Yeah, so they're already checking out this new space. So with that, I'll hand it to Anne for final thoughts and conclusions.
Thanks so much. It's really exciting to see this project come to fruition. It's been a long time in the making, and we have a great crew working with us, not only, like I said, the contractors that you just heard from, but all the community has really come out in a great way to support this project. It is not the only thing going on in the Bay system. This is one big project, but we have other work going on as well that's really complementary to this. And this is the work that TNC is doing, but we have an oyster fishery and habitat management plan that we facilitated and is now being implemented by the Pensacola and Perdido Bays Estuary Program. Thank you so much for taking that on. We are mapping oyster reefs throughout the Bay system. So we received monies from Santa Rosa County to map oysters in that county, and the estuary program received funds to map oysters in the Escambia County. So pretty soon we will have a complete up-to-date understanding of what we have for oyster habitat in this Bay system. And then we're also conducting a filtration study, and that will help inform us where we do oyster restoration in the future for water filtration services, for habitat, and for fisheries. So, this is just a suite of some projects that we're doing. There are other people throughout the Bay system that are working on projects. The estuary program is doing a fantastic job of getting the public included in the work. So we're really excited to be part of this whole program and want to thank you very much. And I'm going to open it up now for questions and comments and anything that we might be able to answer for you. So Logan, I'll turn it over to you to see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everyone. That was fantastic. So if you'd like to ask any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat and we'll let Anne and our team know. We'll pass those along so we're not all trying to speak at once. Or you can raise your hand too, and we'll call on you.
Oh, come on, no questions?
All right, we have a question from Eric. Do you do any larval settlement studies prior to construction to get an idea of whether or not you get wild set? Was it the plan if you don't get larval? What is the plan if you don't get larval settlement?
Yeah, we didn't we weren't able to do larval settlement beforehand, but there's been work throughout the bay system. And so we were working with DEP and FWC and others who know the bay system, the oystermen who fish in the bay system. So there are oysters there. There is settlement happening. There was previous oyster restoration projects in the bay. So we know that the oysters are there. Really, one of the things that's preventing, oysters from, expanding here is the lack of substrate for them to settle on. So it's, that old adage, if you build it, they will come. And that's what we're really anticipating with this project. It may take some time, and oyster populations ebb and flow naturally over time. So that's why we're monitoring. And quite truthfully, thanks to NIFWF, that they had the foresight to fund pre-restoration monitoring, over 2 years of that, and up to 5 years post-restoration. Very few, we don't very often get that amount of monitoring paid for when you're doing restoration. So, and that's really important to understand the success, like Nigel was talking about. So we really do hope that we'll see oysters on the project site. It'll take a year or two, or maybe more, but that's what monitoring will tell us.
And we have another question, Anne, from Commissioner Peach. Will the reefs be marked in some way? There's typically not a lot of watercraft activity out there, but there is some.
Yes, so the reefs are already starting to be marked as they're built by Crowder Gulf. So they're putting up a sign in front of the reefs. But we are also working with FWC to put up additional signage that protects the reefs from harvesting. And we did work with the oystermen on this, and everybody agreed, yeah, we're not going to harvest these reefs. Let's, put a protective sign up. And it also helps prevent just anybody coming in and taking, oysters off the reef. This is for habitat. And so it will be signed in order to protect boating. And I think if you notice in between, there's quite a bit of space in between each reef that allows any boats that can get shallow, have shallow draft to get in behind the reefs and go along shoreline, like mullet fishermen or others. Yeah.
And Anne, we have a hand raised from Deb Franks. Deb, if you want to come off mute to ask your question, go for it.
Can you
Deb,
take her
if
off
you're
mute?
still there, yeah, let's see. I'll ask her to unmute. All right, well, we will come back to Deb. Commissioner Cole also.
Okay, I'm
here she
sorry.
is. No
I'm
worries.
sorry. And I just wanted to say thank you for doing that for the oysters and having it be a habitat that no one can go to. We all love oysters, but we can get them somewhere else. So this is a great thing. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. And Commissioner Cole has his hand raised as well. Oh, Commissioner, you're still on mute.
Okay.
Oh. Back on mute.
Unmute.
Nope.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. And as you know, I was skeptical of this program at the beginning, and I'm certainly elated about the project at this point and what we've seen and what all's gotten done on it. Combining that with the evolution of Bay Area Resource Council to the Perdido Bay Estuary Program, or should I say Perdido or Pensacola Perdido Blackwater Bay Estuary Program, and our possible recognition now, from the federal government to become a national estuary. I think, everything's going way better than I had expected. I can't say we, but I think, again, sorry about all the skepticism at first, but maybe people like me give you guys a little prodding along to keep you doing a good job and keep you doing better. So thank you for all the efforts from everybody, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Oh, Thank you so much, Commissioner Cole. And skepticism is very healthy in a project like this. And we really wanted to get everybody's opinion. So we listened to you at the beginning there and what your comments were about, and we really took it to heart. And that's what makes a project really strong. So no need to apologize or anything. We love that you love the project. So thank you.
Thank you.
And we've got another question from Eric. Were the reefs designed for a certain amount of daily low tide exposure? If so, what was it? And how was sea level rise factored into these calculations?
I'm going to turn that over to Matt, our engineer.
Yeah, good questions. For the first part, designed for a certain amount of daily low tide exposure. We're not anticipating the oysters to be on one specific piece of the reef. But with that in mind, yeah, there's various crest levels of the reef itself. So we did anticipate some diurnal, exposure, and it is seasonal, right? Obviously, during the winter, you're going to see a little bit more exposure than you are during the summer on certain parts and certain, cross sections of the reef, if you will. So it was definitely a design criteria that we considered and just wanted to make sure it was more of like a check for us to make sure that we've got this in a reasonable location tide-wise. And with regard to sea level rise, yes, absolutely. We use the NOAA Army Corps, projections. And as a team, we looked at the wide range. If you've ever done that, there's a very wide range that it could be. And we went with kind of the middle of the pack as far as anticipated sea level rise over the next 20, 30, 40 years. To incorporate that into the more of on the protective piece, right? So making sure that these reefs are at a decent crest elevation to help dampen wave energy long term. So.
Great, thank you. And we have a question. Has the project in Pensacola along Bayfront Parkway been successful in terms of oyster repopulating that area naturally? Can we expect similar results on this project? So we're talking about Project Green Shores here, I believe.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the outcome of Project Green Shores. If somebody on the call is, I know that it's done a great job of protecting the shoreline. And there's marsh that has accreted behind the reefs themselves. I don't believe they were created specifically for oyster habitat, but more for shoreline protection, but that doesn't mean that oysters aren't on it. So I don't know if somebody from the estuary program knows about it or somebody else on the call, whether oysters have settled on it or not. No.
This is Beth Fugate.
Hey, Beth.
Hey, there actually is pretty decent oyster recruitment on those reefs. It varies, depending upon where it is, how submerged it is, the water influx annually, but they're there.
That's great to hear. They're a very charismatic species. I had to get that in. Everybody loves oysters.
Thanks, Beth. That's great. And we have another question. After the oyster bed surveys, how would you rank Pensacola Bay oyster population? On the surface, it looks pretty low.
It is pretty low right now. There aren't a lot of oysters in the bay system, what we're finding from the mapping. And that's why we really have to ramp up restoration. If we're going to restore oysters into the bay system, this is just one project. We need, to multiply this type of project across the entire bay system in Escambia and Santa Rosa County and understand what the objectives are for the restoration. Is it for habitat? Is it for water quality? Is it for fishing, harvesting? And we can have all of that happening in the bay system with oyster restoration, but we have to ramp it up in order to do that. We can not be doing project by project over multiple decades. We won't get there. So.
And Anne, this isn't a question, but just wanted to share a comment in the chat. I'm an angler and frequent the area around the new reefs. I've caught redfish directly around them already. I'm very excited about the future diversity of the area. Thanks for what you're doing to improve water and habitat quality.
Well, thank you, whoever that was. Glad you're fishing around the reefs and that you are catching fish. That's awesome to hear. Would be nice to know, had you caught fish there pre-reefs? If you want to pipe up a little bit, that would be interesting to know as well.
We'll see if
Just
they
put it in
come
the
off.
chat if you want.
And then Melody has her hand raised. Melody, if you want to come off mute.
Hello, thank you. And thanks for this good project update. The project really has come such a long way, and congratulations. I think you said all the reefs are at least 2,000 feet offshore. So that would mean that all the substrate that's receiving reefs and reef material, that's always subtidal. I just wanted to confirm that, and such that no shorebird foraging habitat like tidal flats were built on. So that wherever the reefs are constructed, it looks like they're always submerged. The benthos anyway is always submerged to some degree. So I just wanted to follow up on that regarding shorebird foraging habitat. Thank you.
Matt, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I don't believe I said 2,000 feet. All the reefs are within 400-ish at the closest to the mean high level, to about 700 to 800 feet offshore-ish, depending upon the bathymetry, right? So instead of just doing a linear, we're going to be X amount of feet off, we obviously have a bathymetry survey done ahead of time to understand how shallow it is and where things are, and we try to achieve a consistent depth across them all rather than a consistent distance offshore, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so it is definitely intertidal.
And we haven't impacted any seagrass. We do seagrass surveys prior. So yeah, there's no impact to the vegetation. Does that answer your question, Melody?
I've gotten that 2,000 feet wrong somewhere earlier. So I guess my question is, the no exposed substrate. So if there was wherever a reef went in, it's always underwater regardless of the tide. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So how did you avoid shorebird foraging habitat?
Let me go back to.
Anne, this is Rick.
Yeah.
I understand what Melody is asking, and I think there's a miscommunication occurring. And so Melody, maybe this answers your question. The footprint where all the reefs are is at a water depth that's always underwater.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah,
that was my question.
They're being built up such that the top of those structures is intertidal.
Yes,
but the footprint is deep.
That was the word I was looking for. Footprint. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I knew that they were going to be exposed at some point, but my concern was about the intertidal flats that get exposed. So I mean, clearly you've avoided Escribano Point, and that was an important foraging habitat area. So my concern was about the footprint, and I'm fine with the fact that the tops of the reefs are sometimes exposed, but I just wanted to confirm that there weren't structures being built on above any above water areas. Thank you,
For sure.
Rick.
I guess I'll add to that is that in all construction is happening offshore. There's no construction is coming from the shore too. So I just want to reiterate that everything's coming from barge to help preserve the coastline and to ensure no disturbances there.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome, Melody. Thanks. I wanted to know also, we've had, A few delays with this project since we got approval for construction, bridges across the Mississippi, delaying barge traffic, a couple of storms in the area, COVID. So this project has really had its gamut of delays, and we're still going. And I believe construction started back up. Is that right, Drew?
We're set to start back either late this week or first of next week.
Great.
depending
Okay.
on- Hurricane Ida had everything jammed up and on the Mississippi where it went in was pretty much the worst possible location for marine work on the Gulf Coast, because the Mississippi River kind of affects everything on the Gulf Coast. And with all of our rock coming down the river, it definitely was not ideal. So we are expecting our next shipment of rock most likely late this week, and we're looking to resume construction Monday next week. And we should be in a really good weather pattern, so we can knock out quite a few reefs and get back ahead of schedule. So
Great.
Great. And Anne, it looks like Matt has his hand raised, and
Hey,
I
Matt.
don't see anything else in chat. So this may be our last question for the day.
No questions. I just want to make a comment that it's so great to see after nearly 10 years of work or so roundabout, that this is finally getting implemented, and this is such a great team. It's going to have a tremendous long lasting legacy for East Bay and Blackwater Bay. So everybody should take great pride in that work. And even more so, I think it's great that we have 3 Santa Rosa County commissioners on this call today, which really shows their interest and dedication to the project, and know that they've been very supportive of it, both of the estuary program and of the project directly. So that's great to see, and just wanted to highlight that as well. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Matt. I mean, we couldn't do this project without the community, and nor would we want to. But the community has been so supportive, and that's really a big reason for its success as well. So thank you to everybody who is involved and will continue to be involved. This is your project. We're managing it, we're getting it in the water, but it's really a community project, and that's the way we want you to see it.
Well, I'm not seeing any more questions. So I think that is it for today. Anne and the team, thank you so much for coming and joining us for National Estuaries Week to give us an update on the great work you all have going on. For folks that are still on the call, please check out the other events we have scheduled for this week in honor of National Estuaries Week. We hope to see you at some of them. Everyone have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.